There is a specific kind of genius that only emerges from devastation. Not because suffering is romantic, it isn't. Not because poverty builds character, it doesn't. But because when everything that was supposed to hold a community together has been stripped away, the jobs, the buildings, the basic infrastructure of a functioning city, sometimes what rises from the wreckage is something extraordinary. Something that was only possible because the people who made it had nothing left to lose and everything left to express. The South Bronx in the 1970s was the most abandoned neighborhood in America. Landlords torching their own buildings for insurance money, entire blocks reduced to rubble. Young people, Black, Puerto Rican, Caribbean, navigating gang territory and drug markets, and a city government that had decided their lives were not worth saving. Out of that came hip-hop. And at the center of hip-hop was a man named Lance Taylor, who called himself Afrika Bambaataa. He died on April 9th, 2026, in Pennsylvania from prostate cancer at the age of 68. And the world, the hip-hop world, the music world, the people whose entire artistic identity was shaped by what he built, didn't know whether to celebrate him or condemn him. Maybe both. Maybe you have to do both. Maybe that's the only honest response to a life this large and this complicated. This is that life. All of it. Lance Taylor was born on April 17, 1957, in the South Bronx, New York City, to immigrant parents. His mother from Jamaica, his father from Barbados. He grew up in the Bronx River Projects, a low-income public housing complex in one of the most economically neglected corners of the city. His mother was an activist with a record collection. His uncle was politically engaged. From the very beginning, he was surrounded by people who understood that culture and community were not luxuries. They were survival tools. He was exposed to music early and completely. His mother's vinyl records were his education. Soul, funk, rock, electronic experimentation, all of it mixed together in the same crate. He would later say that those records taught him that genre was a cage, and he refused to stay in one. As a teenager, Lance joined the Black Spades, one of the most powerful street gangs in the South Bronx. This was not a deviation from his path. This was the path, in a neighborhood where the gang was the only functional social institution left standing, where protection and identity and belonging all came through affiliation. The Black Spades were his people, and he rose within them. But something was changing in him. He won an essay contest that earned him a trip to Africa. He watched a 1964 war film called Zulu, about the Zulu warriors who resisted British colonial forces with extraordinary solidarity and courage. He came back to the Bronx with a different name, Afrika Bambaataa Asim, adopting the name of the Zulu chief Bambatha, who had led an armed rebellion against economic oppression in early 20th century South Africa. He told people his new name meant affectionate leader. And then he had the idea that would change everything. What if the gang became something else? What if all the energy, the organization, the territory, the loyalty, the fierce group identity, was redirected, not toward violence, toward music, toward art, toward something that could not be taken away by a bullet or a prison sentence? In 1973, Afrika Bambaataa founded the Universal Zulu Nation. The credo was simple, beautiful, and radical in the context of where it was being delivered: peace, love, unity, and having fun. 4 words that seem obvious until you understand they were being spoken to young men and women in one of the most dangerous urban environments in America, at a moment when peace was not guaranteed from one block to the next. He started throwing block parties, community centers, parks, anywhere there was a speaker and a crowd. He built on what DJ Kool Herc had pioneered: the breakbeat, the isolation of the drum break from a record, and the looping of it, creating an extended rhythmic foundation for dancers and eventually rappers. Bambaataa took that foundation and built a cathedral on it. In 1982, Afrika Bambaataa walked into a recording studio with his group the Soul Sonic Force and producer Arthur Baker, and made a record that nobody had ever heard before. He had been listening to Kraftwerk, the German electronic duo whose clinical, robotic precision seemed as far from the Bronx as it was possible to get. Most DJs at the time would have filed Kraftwerk under not relevant. Bambaataa heard something different. He heard a rhythm. He heard a possibility. He heard what happens when the machine and the human find each other and refuse to let go. He took Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express and numbers, sampled their melodic lines and electronic textures, layered them over a Roland TR-808 drum machine beat, that thunderous, chest-deep boom that would go on to define not just hip-hop, but R&B, techno, Miami bass, and eventually every corner of modern music, and recorded planet rock. It was not a hip-hop record. It was not an electronic record. It was not a dance record. It was all three simultaneously, a genuinely new thing that had not existed before the moment he made it. The term for what he created was electro-funk, but labels don't really capture what happened. What happened was that the future arrived and it had a beat you couldn't argue with. Planet Rock is one of the most sampled records in the history of American music. It changed Daft Punk. It changed Detroit techno. It changed house music. It changed everything that came after 1982 in ways that are still being felt today, in records being made right now, in styles being invented by producers who may not even know where the root is. The follow-ups confirmed this was not a fluke. Looking for the perfect beat in 1983, another electro masterpiece. Renegades of Funk, which excavated the deep African and Black American roots of the form Bambaataa had helped create. And then, in 1984, something remarkable. A collaboration with James Brown, the godfather of soul and the godfather of hip-hop on the same record, a song called Unity, arguing against violence at a moment when the Bronx desperately needed the argument made. By this point, Afrika Bambaataa was not just a Bronx DJ. He was an ambassador. He was traveling the world, to Europe, to Japan, to Australia, carrying hip-hop with him, introducing the Universal Zulu Nation's four elements to audiences who had never seen them. He was the person who made hip-hop global before hip-hop was even comfortable with itself as a name. His reputation as master of records was earned. He is said to have owned tens of thousands of vinyl albums, an eclectic, omnivorous collection that ranged from James Brown to the Rolling Stones, to German electronic music, to Nigerian Afrobeat, to television theme songs. He would play anything that was funky. And he would change it every minute or two because he understood that the crowd needed to be surprised as much as it needed to be moved. In 2013, his archives, vinyl records, original audio and video recordings, manuscripts, books, papers, arrived at Cornell University's hip-hop collection, the largest collection of historical hip-hop music in North America. His contribution to the archive of American culture was formally acknowledged by one of the country's great research universities. He was 56 years old. He was at the height of his institutional recognition. He was teaching scholars about what he had built, and the first accuser had already written a book. In 2014, a man named Ronald Savage, a former Bronx political activist and music industry executive who had grown up in the orbit of Afrika Bambaataa, published a self-published memoir. In it, he described being sexually abused by a well-known musical pioneer. He did not name that person. For 2 years, the book existed without that name being spoken publicly. Then, in March 2016, on a YouTube radio show hosted by a DJ named Star, Ronald Savage said the name. Afrika Bambaataa. Savage alleged that Bambaataa had sexually abused him repeatedly beginning in 1980 when Savage was 15 years old, that Bambaataa had used his position as a neighborhood legend, a man who represented safety and belonging and opportunity in a dangerous world, to gain access to and then exploit a teenage boy. He was 15 years old, and this was a man he had trusted. Bambaataa denied it immediately. His legal team called the allegations baseless and a cowardly attempt to tarnish his reputation and legacy. He went on Fox 5 New York and told reporter Lisa Evers that the allegations were definitely hurting and definitely crazy to hear, and that he had done nothing wrong. But the accusations did not stop at one. 3 more men came forward with similar stories. A former bodyguard for Bambaataa, a man who had stood at his side for years, stated publicly that he had personally witnessed inappropriate behavior between Bambaataa and teenage boys, and that members of the Universal Zulu Nation had known about it for years and said nothing. In October 2016, Vice published a major investigative piece titled "Afrika Bambaataa Allegedly Molested Young Men for Decades." The article gathered accounts from accusers and witnesses. Multiple people quoted in the article said that knowledge of Bambaataa's alleged conduct had been common knowledge in the Bronx River community and beyond since the early 1980s. Mel Mel, the legendary rapper from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, said in a 2021 interview that everyone knew, that it was hip-hop's best-kept secret. The pattern described by the accusers was consistent and specific. Bambaataa allegedly targeted fatherless young men from struggling families, boys who needed what he offered: access, protection, identity, belonging, a way out of the devastation of the South Bronx. He presented himself as a mentor and a father figure. He gave them proximity to something extraordinary. And then, according to the men who accused him, he used that proximity to abuse them. Bam took the kids who were struggling, the kids who didn't have good parents and had nothing. That was how one anonymous longtime associate described the alleged pattern to vice. The abuse started off the same way, the article noted: an adult in authority, a young person without protective adults in their life, and a system of organization around them that, when it became aware of what was happening, chose to protect its own reputation, rather than the children. The parallel to the Catholic Church cover-up scandal was not lost on observers. The comparison was made explicitly in multiple accounts by people inside the Zulu nation itself. The Universal Zulu Nation's response was, ultimately, to act. In May 2016, the organization disassociated itself from Bambaataa, announcing that all accused parties and those accused of covering up the allegations of child molestation had been removed from their roles. On May 6th, Bambaataa resigned as head of the Universal Zulu Nation, the organization he had founded in 1973, the organization that was his most lasting non-musical legacy, the organization through which he had claimed to stand for the protection of the community's most vulnerable young people. A month later, the Zulu Nation issued an open letter signed by nearly 36 members from around the world, including leaders from as far as New Zealand, apologizing to the people alleging abuse. The letter expressed responsibility for the organization's poor response and praised the alleged victims for their bravery. No criminal charges were ever filed. The statute of limitations had long passed for most of the alleged conduct. But in 2021, a John Doe filed a civil lawsuit alleging that Bambaataa had repeatedly sexually abused and trafficked him for 4 years, beginning in 1991, when the plaintiff was 12 years old. In May 2025, after Bambaataa failed to appear in court, a New York judge entered a default judgment against him in the sex trafficking and abuse case. He lost, not because he admitted anything, because he did not show up to fight it. Bambaataa denied all of it to the end. He told Lisa Evers, "I never abused nobody." He said the allegations were hurting to hear when he had been doing so much other work in the community. The community that raised the accusers had also been doing that work, and some of that community said he had done this in the middle of all of it. After 2016, Afrika Bambaataa largely retreated from public life. He was gone from the Zulu Nation. He was absent from the hip-hop conversation in any official capacity. The invitations to speak at conferences, to receive honours at institutions, to be celebrated as a founding figure, those dried up or became politically complicated. The hip-hop community that had grown up under his influence was forced to decide what to do with what he had given them. It was not a comfortable conversation. Artists who had learned everything they knew from the culture he built now had to reckon with what he had allegedly done inside that culture. Some, like Rakar Irascience of Dilated Peoples and producer Ninth Wonder, withdrew from their respective Zulu Nation chapters. Others, like KRS-One, chose to defend his musical legacy while acknowledging the complexity. For me, if you keep it hip-hop, nothing can be taken away from Afrika Bambaataa. History is history. KRS-One said that. It is a position. It is a defensible one in some ways. History is history. What he made, he made. The Roland TR 808. The Kraftwerk samples. The 4 elements. The Zulu Nation chapters in New Zealand and Japan and Brazil. None of that can be unmade, but the boys who became men who filed lawsuits have a different relationship to history. Their history is also history. Bambaataa was reportedly in Pennsylvania in his final years, away from New York, away from the Bronx, away from the world he had built and the world that was still arguing about him. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He fought it privately, the way he had kept many things private. He died on April 9th, 2026, which was, by strange coincidence of calendar, 1 week before what would have been his 69th birthday. His lawyer confirmed the death. The Hip Hop Alliance, headed by early rapper Curtis Blow, acknowledged his transition, calling him a foundational architect of hip-hop culture, while also noting that his legacy was complex and had been the subject of serious conversations within our community. Serious conversations, that is one way to put it. Here is the problem that Afrika Bambaataa's death presents, and that his life has always presented, and that the history of hip-hop has been slowly and painfully learning to navigate. He built something that saved lives, and he allegedly destroyed lives in the building of it. Those two statements are not in tension. They are not contradictions. They are both facts, living in the same body, demanding to be held at the same time. The Universal Zulu Nation drew young people away from gang violence in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in America. Documented. Real. There are men and women alive today who will tell you that the Zulu Nation, that those block parties, that the philosophy of peace, love, unity, and having fun saved them, gave them something to belong to that didn't require them to hurt anyone. That is not a small thing. In the context of the South Bronx in the 1970s and 80s, that is enormous, and the boys who accused him of abuse were also trying to survive that same neighborhood. They were also vulnerable. They were also fatherless or marginalized or struggling. And if the accounts that multiple people gave, in lawsuits, in journalism, in sworn testimony, are accurate, then the man who told them he was their protector was the person they most needed protection from. You cannot separate those two things and still be telling the truth. The hip-hop community has spent years trying to separate them, trying to find a formula. Maybe we can celebrate the music but condemn the man, or celebrate the institution but acknowledge the abuse, or honor the legacy while centering the survivors. These are all attempts to make something manageable that is not actually manageable. What Mel said is the most damning piece of all of this, not because it condemns Bambaataa alone, but because of what it implies about a system. Everyone knew. Hip-hop's best-kept secret. That means the culture that called itself peace, love, unity, and having fun was built, in part, around a wall of silence that protected a man who was allegedly abusing children for decades, while that same man was celebrated as the community's greatest protector. That is not Bambaataa's failure alone. That is a community's failure, and the community, to its credit, slowly, painfully, decades too late for the men who came forward, eventually acknowledged it. Afrika Bambaataa is survived by his music, his archives, his philosophy, and the accusations against him. He is survived by the millions of people around the world who learned the four elements and built a life inside them. He is survived by the men who said he abused them, who are still alive, still carrying what they carry, still waiting for a reckoning that a default court judgment and a death certificate do not fully provide. He was born Lance Taylor in the South Bronx in 1957. He renamed himself after a Zulu chief who fought against oppression. He turned a gang into an organization. He turned a neighborhood's pain into a global art form. He made Planet Rock. He was accused by multiple men of sexually abusing children over multiple decades. He settled a lawsuit after losing by default. He denied everything to the end. He took whatever the full truth was with him to Pennsylvania. The Hip Hop Alliance said his legacy was complex. Complex is a very gentle word for it, but it is the word we have, and the legacy we have. All of it. Hip-hop is 50 years old. It has survived poverty, censorship, appropriation, commercialization, and the deaths of more of its founders than anyone should have to count. What it has not always survived is the full truth about the people who built it. The myth is easier. The myth is safer. The myth is what you put on the plaque. The truth is what you owe the children. Afrika Bambaataa, April the 17th, 1957 to April 9th, 2026. Godfather of hip-hop, founder of the Universal Zulu Nation, creator of Planet Rock, a man whose name will be spoken in arguments for as long as there is hip-hop to argue about, peace, love, unity, and the whole truth, and the